30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You. And All About You is one of two different programs that I have the pleasure of hosting and producing live every single week at accesstv.org studio. All About You is a show that's designed to let you, the guests, or the viewers know some information and background and pretty much the life story of the particular guest. This morning on the All About You talk show, we have a guest who has an amazing life story, who really was able to turn his life towards something very successful under tremendous adversity and conditions that might not be as possible for many other people to do so. The guest this morning on the All About You talk show is a motivational speaker, author, coach, entrepreneur, no other than Dr. Tommy Watson. Good morning, Dr. Watson. How are you
Jonathan, how you
doing?
doing, sir? You gotta add movie producer on there as well and rapper as well.
Well, I didn't know that you was a rapper. I know you working on a movie, but I didn't realize that you was in the rapping. Okay, movie
I'll
producer
play some of
and
that before
rapper.
we get off the air. I'll give you a couple bars before we get off the air
All
though.
right. Well, Tommy, I believe you were born in Denver, Colorado.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I grew up in a 5 Points area of Denver, Colorado, Colorado's first black neighborhood.
Hmm.
The home of Pam Grier, Don Cheadle, Philip Betty from Earth, Wind and Fire, and billionaire Robert Smith. Of course, they all grew up on the other side. I
Right.
grew up on the other end as well. But yeah, it's my hometown.
Now, growing up in Denver, Colorado, you have to adjust to that mile high altitude. Is that kind of hard to breathe, or do you kind of get used to it when you're
Well, you know,
living?
when you're from there, you kind of used to it. But anybody coming to play the Broncos or the Denver Nuggets or any other high school teams up there, it definitely serves as an advantage because you're not gonna get enough air when you come up to that place. So it becomes kind of a second win opportunity for us, you know, to have the aspect at play when it comes to sports there for sure.
Now, I guess as a kid, you were a big Denver Broncos fan.
Still am.
Still
No,
am.
no other team out there for me, man. Denver Broncos, Denver Nuggets fan. So all things Colorado.
Okay, so what was it like watching the Denver Broncos and trying to play, well, playing sports as a kid for you growing
Yeah,
up?
you know, great question. You know what? Growing up in Denver, the 5 Points area I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Unfortunately, when I was growing up there, it's a time where we had a lot of the gangs left LA and they migrated out to Denver, Colorado. So we had a lot of negative things going in the community. So turning on to the sports aspect of it, you know, the Denver Broncos gave us hope and then an enlightenment to another possibility. But it was always great seeing, you know, Tom Joyner. I mean, Tom. I can't. I'm blanking the names, but Sammy Winder and a bunch of other
Hmm.
great players, the Three Amigos. You know, when they were playing back then. You know,
Well, John
so
Elway too.
John Elway, of course, John Elway,
Hmm.
yeah, John
Hmm.
Elway, and you know Terrell Davis and all those folks. You know, growing up
Right.
seeing Terrell Davis, I saw him when I was a little bit older, but you know, it was great. And then you know, getting a chance to go to the Super Bowl, losing, of course, to the Washington Redskins, but no better person to lose to than Doug Williams, though, for sure, though.
And then I guess the ultimate climax was when the Broncos were able to win their first Super Bowl.
Yes, yes, that was great. I think we've been to four. We've won two or three. So I think the first one came against Green Bay. So that was a highlight for me. I was actually in college at the time. So yeah. So all things Denver Broncos for sure, brother Jonathan.
But Tommy, you also, I guess you had enjoyed playing basketball because you would eventually start playing basketball in high school as well.
Yeah, you know, basketball was the sport of choice that was introduced to most of us in the neighborhood because it was pretty easy because we had recreation centers all over the place, and for the most part, even a lot of my friends who turned to gangs and stuff, we were all original basketball players early on because we would see the Denver Nuggets and other folks out there, and it was an easy sport to play in the recreation centers. But as I got to high school, I ended up going to a high school in the suburbs in Denver, Colorado, and part of the requirement there was to play football, which was something that was hard for me to adjust to originally because I wasn't really into football as much as I love basketball. But eventually, came around to it as a running back and ended up thriving in that area.
Any particular Denver Nuggets basketball player that you kind of idolize, that you kind of stood out more than others?
Alex English, man. Everybody
Alex?
loves Alex English, man. He was the smooth. He was one of the most smoothest basketball players out there growing up. And then later on, of course, Chauncey Billups, who played with us for a little bit. I grew up playing basketball against Chauncey in the neighborhood, so it was great to see him have a little stint there in Denver as well.
Yeah, I remember Alex. I was just actually thinking about Alex English. Very quiet, humble
Yes.
person, but definitely could score and
Yeah.
really be a shooter. I guess he was like a shooting player. Like he like this. I don't think he played guard forward. I think he was a small forward.
Yeah,
But
it's like a three position, but he had a smooth shot. Just one of the smoothest guys. Nonchalant, but he was kind of the quiet assassin. He would lure you to sleep and then tear you up on the court, though. Yeah.
exactly. And then Tommy, excuse me, Doctor Watson, you had kind of an unstable childhood of instability, living at different places. Your parents were addicted to drugs. This was really not a simple process for a normal kid to grow up under. If you kind of want to elaborate what it was like for you to really live in these type of circumstances.
Absolutely. So we had all the things going on outside with the drugs and the gang stuff, and then on the inside, my mom and dad, unfortunately, they were heroin addicts, and they were arrested. Well, they were heroin addicts and also professional shoplifters. We called boosters back in the days. So they were arrested 121 times by the time I finished high school. So as a kid, my siblings and I, there's six of us. We've never all lived together, grew up together as kids together. Matter of fact, met my oldest brother by pure coincidence in a foster home. Lived in numerous foster homes, crisis centers, motel rooms, group homes. Attended numerous schools. By the time I finished high school, I lived in 30 different locations there in Denver, Colorado. Lived in seven different motel rooms. So we were all over the place as kids, and it was very uncomfortable, constantly not knowing when the shoe was going to drop each time you came home in terms of when you're going to be, when we were going to be set out of a house. We got set out of a number of houses right in front of our friends. It was painful growing up in that environment because you had the elements that were happening outside with the gang members and the drugs and all the other stuff, but inside was equally is probably not probably more even worse because we're seeing it firsthand with our parents using drugs and then being with them one moment and then next moment being in a foster home, next moment being in a group home, next moment living in motel rooms, next moment doubled up with other family and friends, next moment with my aunt, next moment with my grandmother. So we were all over the place growing up as kids, and it was by God's grace that I sit here today, though. So I don't take that lightly at all. Yes.
Well, Dr. Watson, how was you able to function normally? I mean, going to school, just trying to adapt to knowing what you was going to eat, where you was going to live. I mean, did it have a type of impact on your grades average in school, just your attendance level in school? I mean, it just doesn't sound like this could be a stable way to function for anybody, let alone a child or a teenager growing up.
Absolutely. I mean, at one time I went to four different elementary schools in one year, so I missed a lot of the primary educational components that were crucial for a kid to survive and do well in school. We missed a lot of days of school, period, because oftentimes my parents would leave us for days by ourselves. So we had the option in elementary school, whether we went to school or not. And a lot of days we didn't go to school, and we were going to school. We were going to school oftentimes just for the food. So in third grade, by the time I arrived with my aunt, I lived in numerous foster homes, crisis centers, motel rooms. My goal at the time was to join and lead the local gang. Luckily, my aunt got me involved in basketball, so that ambitions of joining the gang didn't go any further than that. But once I got introduced to the world of sports, to your point about early pieces around sports, it gave me hope to possibly be that next NBA player for the Denver Nuggets or the NFL player for the Denver Broncos, which kind of inspired me to kind of keep going very, very, very hard when those days were dark. So, my goal and ambition to be an athlete allowed me to go to a recreation center called the Glen Recreation Center, which was kind of a saving grace for many of us, where I put a lot of my time and energy at every day, hoping, praying that I would be the next person to get that call to go to the NFL or NBA is what gave me hope to dream beyond my circumstances. 'Cause I tell people oftentimes, if you're going to make it through tough times, you got to be able to have a dream that's bigger than your circumstances. So my dream of going to the NFL was always bigger than what I was enduring at the time.
So again, sports seemed like it was your outlet on a positive level, comparable to the other outlets that you were surrounded by with gangs and, let's just say, probably drugs and that type of fast money lifestyle. But at the same time, you're still struggling going through high school. I mean, you're still dealing with a lot of housing issues, personal issues. How come going by your trailer documentary, do you think you were so unique that you were able to beat the odds and not fall into the vicious cycles that particularly seem like, going by the documentary, that your other brother or brothers and sisters had also been through?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Hmm.
So in eighth grade, I got a chance. We got kicked out of our house in front of all our friends. Nine of us moved in one motel room. And I remember being in that motel room. I just hated the environment. I hated wearing dirty clothes to school every day. I hated being separated from my brothers and sisters. Hated seeing my mom and dad in prison. So I can't really speak as much for them, but I mean, it wasn't a dislike. I hated that situation.
Hmm.
So it drove me to really find an outlet. So in my playing basketball in eighth grade, there was a coach who came to the inner cities of Denver, Colorado, and talked to me and my inner city friends about the chance of going to this high school that was in the suburbs, private school. And he mentioned that if we came out to the school, we'd get a chance to go to college. And I remember that moment, something sparked in me, said, this right here is going to be my outlet out here. So while living in that motel room with nine other people, I went on for the first time. I got on the honor roll. I became a one-on-one basketball champ in my school, wrestling champ in my school, and I won an award that was given to 24 kids in the entire state of Colorado while living in that motel room. That's how serious I was about changing my life. I didn't have any parental support. All six adults were drug addicts in this one room. But I was really hungry to go out to this high school and do well. I remember bringing the opportunity to my mom and dad, and they were like, "You're not going out to that predominantly white school." And well, long story short, they ended up going back to prison in the ninth grade year of school. My little brother, my sister, and I moved with my grandmother. My grandmother's wish to go out to that high school and do well every day. So thank God for my grandmother Helen, my Aunt Mildred, my middle school basketball coach A.B. Maxey, and my high school football coach Pete Levine, and my uncle John Watson as well. These were some people who kind of really just kind of just continued to support me as I was trying to go that route. But I was hungry to change my life story because again, there's some people who go through that stuff and they dislike it. I hated it. That
Hmm.
was the word. I hated it. I mean, there was no other way of looking at it for me though. I hated being hungry. I hated being dirty all the time. So that right there drove and pushed me to excel in sports.
And then it seemed like to me maybe your first big accomplishment was, number one, not getting in. At least I don't believe you got into the juvenile detention system, or
Yeah.
not. You did not. Okay, but I believe one other family member did. Your brother,
Yeah, several. I got two
several,
other brothers.
two other brothers. Okay,
They all had run-ins. They both had run-ins with the criminal justice system as well. Yeah,
okay. But then I'm just saying, to not be able to get caught up into that system, to not really get caught up into being a gang member, not to be in some system. I guess to be in some situation where your life, you get shot or just get arrested. I mean, you was able to beat the odds first of all on that level, and then also you was able to graduate high school.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I was definitely by the grace of God that I didn't get caught up in some of the other stuff because I was definitely in some circles where I shouldn't have been in and did some things I shouldn't have been doing from time to time.
Hmm.
But for the most part, I was pretty locked in on trying to become a Division One athlete so I could go to the NFL. So at this high school, it was a great place to kind of leave the neighborhood. It was about an hour bus ride from my neighborhood, so I took three city buses along with a couple of my friends from the neighborhood out to this high school every day. So in doing that, we got a chance to kind of transform and kind of see a different side of what was possible for us as we watched the neighborhoods kind of change. As we went out to this very affluent high school where the kids on the weekends when they went skiing, they went to resorts their parents partially owned. So there was a lot of millionaires out there, and just gave us a chance to kind of see and experience something different and to say, hey, we can do this same thing someday. They're not any smarter than we are. They're not any more talented than we are, but we didn't have a lot of resources. But in doing that, and then having a great group of teachers and supporters, admin folks at the high school was pretty important in supporting us in this predominantly. I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood and was taking the city buses, three different city buses to this predominantly white high school that was very affluent. So we needed the supports from folks within the school to be able to survive that environment, because they were seeing on the news our neighborhood constantly on the news from gangs and drugs and stuff like that. And then from a lot of our African Americans in our neighborhood, they were getting upset with us because we were taking our athletic skills out to this predominantly white high school. So it was a kind of a double-edged sword. We had to kind of learn to live between these two environments with my small group of friends who were coming from the east side, 5 Points of Denver, to kind of be a support system and going out to this predominantly white high school called Mullen High School.
Well, Dr. Watson's, it sounds like to me you probably went through more as a teenager towards just, let's say, adversity of being homeless, bouncing around in different homes from this place to that place than the average person would ever go through towards their entire life. So I guess what you would say after accomplishing that goal, like you say, not to really get caught up into something detrimental towards your life that you couldn't get out of at least, and then graduating high school, the next step was for you to go off to college. How was the whole college preparation about? Did you win a scholarship or did you have to work and save? I mean, what was the whole transition from high school to college at the next?
Great question. I was very fortunate to go to a school that was pretty. They were pretty dominant when it came to football. That's why we recruited to the high school. We were number 5 in the country when I was coming out of high school. We had 9 guys go play D1. I was an All-American high school football player at the time as well. Sat over 30 Division I scholarships out for football. It was really a matter of picking the right school. Unfortunately, my mom had just went back to prison in the middle of my senior year of high school for the 44th time, and my dad had got arrested for the 77th time for a combination of 121 times between the two of them. So when I was making my decision for colleges, it was based upon the colleges where I had the most fun at. But my high school football coach, I give him a lot of credit, Pete Levine, he wanted me to make sure I got out of Colorado no matter what was going to happen. So I did leave out of Colorado, and we went off to attend the University of Minnesota. An interesting thing that took place for me during that time, the movie Boys in the Hood also came out my senior year of high school. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing the character Rick. Rick and I had a lot of characteristics in common. We were both coming from a drug environment. We both were athletes. We both had family members who were involved in gangs. And I remember him dying at the end of the movie, and there was some angst that my teammate and I, my best friend and I in high school, we went to go see that movie. We both started crying. He was like, "Man, you gotta get out of this place." So there was always this angst as I was finishing my senior year of high school. Can I finish the cross line? Can I cross the finish line without being killed? Because when I'd already been in the drive-by shooting, there was a lot of stuff constantly happening in our neighborhood. There were a lot of guys being killed in the neighborhood, and it was leading up to something they called the summer of violence in the city of Colorado, where there's still like 50 guys who are still in doing life sentences just from that summer alone. When I was back in Denver at that time, so it was this huge angst that I need to cross this finish line so I can get out of here and go off to the University of Minnesota. I literally graduated on Sunday. That following Thursday, I was shipped off to the University of Minnesota with everything I owned. I never moved back home at that point in time.
I was just going to ask you that question. Did you ever look back, or did you ever have any plans on going back to Denver? And you just said you never went back to that particular place.
Never moved back. I definitely went back to visit and stuff like that. But it was never in God's plan for me to actually move back there, because I certainly wanted to. Mm-hmm. I love my neighborhood, 5 Points. I loved the experience. I mean, I didn't love all the circumstances I grew up there, but I loved my neighborhood. I loved the people there. That's all I knew at the time. Mm-hmm. But plans for me to really kind of settle down and kind of become part of the community there in Minnesota for sure.
Okay, so Dr. Watson, when you arrive in Minnesota and you are playing football for a Big Ten college, this is a real big goal now. I mean, the University of Minnesota is one of the top teams in the Big Ten conference. And I don't know, was there any other particular players that you think people would know of that played for the University of Minnesota?
It's probably more so the guys we played against. We played against Eddie George, Tom Brady, Marshall Faulk, Jonathan McNabb. So we were playing against a lot of high-powered teams at the time. We were actually not one of the top teams in the Big Ten. The Big Ten was highly competitive at the time. We were taking a lot of lumps. So I went from a great high school team where we were winning all of our games to college where we were winning very few games. So it was quite an adjustment there, adjusting to that, though, for sure.
Well, what position did you play as a college football player?
That's when I was about 30 pounds lighter. I was running back.
A running back.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, now you mentioned Marshall Faulk. Now that's one of my favorite players.
Yeah.
Particularly when he played with the Rams. Honestly, was your style like him? Was you fast and zigzag?
I was a bigger running back. So I was Marshall Faulk was very quick and shifty. In particular, when we played against him at San Diego State, he was a very shifty guy. But the other thing is I was a big running back. I was 6'1", 230, but I could run fast, but I could also catch the ball because that was part of what we did in high school. So I was kind of unique in the sense of I was a big running back, but also had really good feet because I was a former basketball player. So I was really good at shaking guys and making moves. And because a lot of my teammates called me two-step back in the days because I had really good shifty feet where I could actually shake guys and make moves on them. But that came from playing basketball. And then big catch was pretty unique as well. But Marshall Faulk, Hall of Famer, he was in a world of his own. So I can't even put myself in the space with him at all.
I was just going to ask you, do you think you was better than Marshall Faulk, or could you
Right.
run good? I wanted to ask you that, but you kind of already answered
Right.
the question.
I would be lying completely, man, if I even made a comparison, even threw myself in a close to him at all. Yeah.
Okay. But now, as playing a college football player, what was it like, the whole atmosphere? Did it kind of give you that self-structure that you really been urging for pretty much your whole life? I mean, you're not having to worry about the same gang problems that you had to worry about back home in Denver, or was there still some obstacles that you were still going through even at the University of Minnesota?
Adjusting from high school to college football was huge. I mean, especially going to the Big Ten. And then I remember my first year at the University of Minnesota, we finished the first season, and when the season was over, I was like, "Hey, I'm about to go kick it until next fall." And the coaches were like, "No, you're not. You're going home for Christmas break. You're going to work out. And you're going to come back, and we have winter conditioning. Then we have spring ball, and then we have summer conditioning." I was like, "Whoa!" So I mean, it was a full-time job being a college athlete in at the University of Minnesota. And I wasn't aware if that was going to be the case when I was in high school, because in high school I can go play basketball. I may or may not do track. The summertime we may, it was optional, but at the University of Minnesota things are pretty much mandatory. You're doing it all year round. But that was the big ticket sport for the university. So we were the cash cow, and we had to go put in the work for it for sure, though. But I didn't understand just how much of a business it was coming out of high school going into college. So we were the physical demand on you was just absolutely incredible. And I watched a lot of guys quit. There were times where I contemplated quitting myself. I wanted to transfer, but my coaches wouldn't let me transfer as well. But it was definitely a big business, and it was quite an adjustment making, going to a school my high school was probably less than 1,000 kids to going to University of Minnesota. It was almost 70,000 kids. Yeah, big adjustment.
Well, Dr. Watson, did you have a goal of trying to become an NFL player, or was it just for you just to finish college football and utilize your education towards a career?
My goal was definitely to go play in the NFL. I knew a lot of great running backs, so a lot of my time early on was kind of spent playing behind one of my teammates who came out of high school with me. He actually became a Heisman Trophy finalist, Chris Darkins. And then when I got injured. So I had to pivot really quickly because I knew my injury into my football career, but I knew I couldn't go back home to Denver. So it was vitally important for me to lock in and make sure I was going to be one of the few kids who went to the University of Minnesota, got their degrees, because a lot of my teammates didn't get their degrees. So I went on and made sure I got that degree and continued on with my education, though. But yeah.
Now, Dr. Watson, when you just said you knew you couldn't go back home to Denver, was that almost saying like you really had nothing to go back to? You didn't want to get caught up into the same problems, and you kind of wanted to move forward? Because that's kind of a surrealistic statement that sometimes people say, that they don't want to go back to some place that they had pretty much a problem with. Or was it a little bit more to it than just that?
Literally, when I left Denver, my mom was in prison, my dad was in prison, my little brother was in prison, my grandmother, who was my last legal guardian, was in a nursing home. My oldest brother was back there involved in gangs. My older sister was back there on crack cocaine. My second sister was in foster care in Iowa. My youngest sister lived with my aunt. Until my junior and senior of high school, I lived in 5 different locations, spent the last 6 months homeless, sleeping on a friend and family's floor. When I say I didn't have anything to go back to, I didn't have anything to go back to. Matter of fact, when I got to the University of Minnesota, they had to petition the NCAA to get me additional funding beyond my scholarship because I was not awarded the court. I didn't fit any of the categories for an independent student, so they had to actually create another process for me to get additional funding. So there was literally nothing for me to go back to. Even when I went home for breaks and vacations, oftentimes I may be able to stay with this person. I may be able to stay with this person. Oftentimes I would take the Greyhound bus back because my home situation was so unstable. And, the bus ride from Minneapolis, from Denver, took 22 hours. So I knew at least I had a night to sleep going and a night to sleep coming back. And I could also leave Denver at any point in time. But my teammates would often laugh because when I'd be headed to the Greyhound bus station from Minneapolis, they would be headed to the airport. But what they didn't know at the time was that situation. I didn't have anywhere to stay at oftentimes. So there was literally nowhere for me to go back to when I left Denver.
Well, Dr. Watson, I know currently you live in Charlotte, a warmer climate, but I forgot to ask you, what was it like? And they call it sometimes Coleopolis because Minneapolis is so cold. But you're coming from Denver, you're kind of already used to the cold weather. Was that cold winters in Minneapolis even more colder than Denver?
Yeah, that was totally different. Denver, we got a lot of snow because we were pretty high up in the altitude, but Minnesota, it stayed cold for so long, and it was just, I mean, literally, I think when I first year in Minnesota, we had maybe 50 below wind chill, and we still had to go practice, to the dome to practice and everything else. So the winters usually start in October. We didn't get a break from it until April. So whereas in Denver, you get to snow a couple of days, you get a break, maybe back in the 60s or what have you, though. But in Minnesota, you rarely get those breaks. So I mean, it's the frozen tundra. It was brutal up there. Yeah.
It is one of the coldest places in the country, from what people tell me. So now, did you graduate from college at the University of Minnesota, and what was your next step after that particular stage?
So I graduated from University of Minnesota in 1997, and I went on to grad school, got a master's degree, an advanced graduate degree, and a doctorate of education from St. Mary's University of Minnesota. Became a school principal, did that for a number of years, and then left that to go start my own coaching, consulting, and speaking business. Yes, sir.
Now, didn't you have an injury while you was playing college football that kind of slowed down your chances of going to the NFL? Was that part of it?
Yeah, when I felt like my opportunity was starting to present itself, I ended up having a back injury from lifting weights, and that really just kind of derailed my whole football career. But I think it was heaven sent because, again, it forced me to kind of delve deep into who I was. Because at that point in time, I was not even interested in sharing my story. I was just simply there to play football, to go to the NFL, make lots of money, and I was going to be happy, though. But when I got the injury, it really forced me to step away from all my identity at that point in time had been associated with sports. From the point I got into sports in third grade, and with that sport aspect leaving my life, I had to kind of find out who really Tommy Watson really was, and it forced me to delve deeper into my story, deal with some issues around depression, dealt with some issues of having voids and other stuff in my life, and really kind of had to kind of find my spiritual life and really kind of rebuild myself. So I would have never, I don't think, gotten that opportunity had I gone to the NFL and made a lot of money, where I could just continue to wear the mask of superstarism and not necessarily deal into those issues, though.
Now, currently, Dr. Watson, you're working on an upcoming film. You've done some documentaries in the past. You're an advocate, almost a community activist towards the homeless issue that we have in our country, particularly now that children and families are also being plagued by homelessness. Is this kind of part of your next mission that you're working on? And could you kind of explain a little bit about your upcoming film that you're going to have put together as a movie star, as you called yourself?
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay.
I won't be in the movie, so I won't necessarily be a star, but there'll be some other stars in the movie, though, for sure.
All right.
I wrote the book back in 1999. Came out in 2008, and that was the first time I really shared my story publicly with anyone, and got a chance to see how it was inspiring people, and I really appreciated that. It became an award-winning book, and then I felt that there were a lot of people who needed to hear the story who may not necessarily be book readers. So I decided in 2019 to turn into a short film. The short film won 8 awards, and now we're working on the feature film, which we're in the process of raising funds for and hoping to start production on here in Charlotte, North Carolina this year, in hopes that the movie will be out in 2026, though. So it's a long process, but it's a movie called Resilient, Against All Odds. And we want to be able to shed a light on childhood homelessness, which is one of the biggest issues kind of taking place in our society right now, because last year we had 4.6 million children and young people who were suffering with childhood homelessness in the United States of America, which is very, very different from poverty, childhood poverty. Most people try to associate the two together. And I'll give you this example here, how they're different. So when I was in middle school, many of my friends lived in the projects in Denver, Colorado. And not to minimize their situation whatsoever, but many of them were getting government assistance. They lived in the projects. They were coming home to a stable place. Many of them were going on the school bus together, with a couple of them, 100 of them, being picked up on the school bus, going together. My family and I were living, in a motel room. We didn't have, the address wasn't really our address. So when you live in a motel space and stuff like that, you don't have a real home address, so you don't qualify for a lot of government assistance. We couldn't have anybody call the house. I mean, because you would have been called in the front desk at the motel room. So when you're dealing with childhood homelessness, you're visible, but you're invisible. You're there, but you're not really there. You kind of split off the scene socially when things are taking place, because you don't really have the the accommodations to have people over. Oftentimes your clothes aren't clean because you're wearing the same things over and over again. When it comes to school, you don't want to necessarily have a lot of remote learning because typically you're in a room with a bunch of other people. So, as long as you're in school, you can kind of look normal. But the moment it comes to the home base, that's where the discrepancy takes place. And you start seeing that the normal is not really normal. You have kids who are, in foster homes, group homes, motel rooms, doubled up with other families. So when you deal with homelessness, that's very, very different from poverty, where you have an address and you're on the radar screen and you can receive support for government assistance.
Well, Dr. Watson, obviously look and come across that you're doing very well, successfully. Sometime externally and internally is really important, not just on the outside. But do you think this mission that you're being driven by is kind of a way, or let's say, not forgetting where you came from and a way of giving back towards our society? Because you could be at a stage of your life now that you're just moving forward with your own personal life and professional life, and not really take on, and I don't say take on a burden, but obviously if you're really trying to advocate changes in the United States, I mean, you probably have your hands full in Charlotte alone with the homelessness issues that city is plagued with. But do you look at what you're doing now as just a way of keeping something inside you driven and just giving back towards some circumstances that you can identify with? Or what's the whole breakdown of why you're at this movement that you're moving towards now?
The funny thing is life, when we start looking for our purpose, man, oftentimes our purpose in life is connected to the pain that we have experienced later on. Because there was a point in time I never thought about telling my story. I didn't want to tell my story. I was too embarrassed to tell it. I was hurt by it. But once I discovered the opportunity to heal from it, and then how my healing was helping other people who were dealing with it, overcome it, it became kind of my purpose, my mission in life. I remember the first time I publicly shared my story with the newspaper, and I was actually downtown Minneapolis after the story kind of presented itself. Actually, it was on the news. I was shared it public with the news, and I was being showcased in a lot of the news stations. And that following night, I was getting ready to go to a nightclub, and I was walking down the street. And there was an African American guy walking towards me, and he kept looking at me as we were approaching each other. And I was getting ready to, be on the defense. I know something's gonna happen. And we got to each other, and he said, "Hey, you were the guy that was on the news." He started crying. And he started sharing with me his story. He said, "Thank you for sharing your story." And at that moment in time, we didn't even make it to the club that night. I didn't make it to the club. He and I sat there about an hour telling our stories to each other. And I told myself, I said, this is a lot bigger than just Tommy Watson at this point in time. There are a lot of kids in these situations who need to know that they can make it out of it. Because hope, we started talking about the word hope. Hope is one of the most important words, I think, behind love in our society. Hope, in order for a person to be hopeful, they have to have willpower and way power. So willpower comes internally. My grandmother used to say, you have to have some want to about yourself, boy. So you got to have some want to about yourself. But then it's that way power. The way power is helping other people, young people, see the way out of these situations. I'm also a member of the 100 Black Men of Greater Charlotte, and I'm also a member of Omega Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, RU. And we do a lot to help our young people see the pathway out of the challenges that they're facing. So my goal, my mission in life is for those young people who are dealing with childhood homelessness. I want you to know that you can make it out of it. And I want you to know that you don't have to stay there. But I also want people in general to know, who are dealing with any type of challenges in life, period, that those challenges don't last forever, and that a lot of them are temporary, and that you can be hopeful and become resilient and make it out of it, and then look back and help out someone else in the situation as well. So it's kind of a twofold approach to this movie, and I'm glad to have the support of the NFL and the Denver Broncos, who are supporting us in this as well. But every time I look at this young man's face right here, it keeps me motivated to keep going, because I picture myself as that little boy who was scarred up, not necessarily had a lot of the physical scars, but just wounded from life, and was searching for a way to get out of it. And I want to be that way for someone else, though, for sure.
Dr. Watson, I was just thinking, your life, I mean, what you've been through, you see other examples of documentaries of certain players. I know you didn't make it to the NFL, but certainly you became very successful, and you was able to go through some tremendous odds that was stacked up against you. Would you like to also do, well, you've already done documentaries about your life. I was going to ask you, would you like to do another feature film about your life and showing exactly?
Yeah, well, right now we're just working on this feature film. What I would like to do after this is probably encourage other people and show other people how to do their own movies, because it's been a long process. It's a long process. I own all the rights to it, but I've written the script. I rapped the theme song for it.
Hmm.
I've done everything as it relates to the movie, and I want to be able to show people the process of how they can go about turning their story into a book, movie, song, or whatever it may be. Because there are a lot of people who have a lot of great stories who need to be told, and to be able to utilize those stories to inspire and help other people as well. So I'll be on a mission to do that next. But once my story is told, it's then at that point in time for me to empower other people to tell their stories.
And Dr. Watson, you work with any, let's say, elected officials down in Charlotte, because you're hearing of late with the upcoming federal cuts that many programs like homeless shelters, services for the poor is going to be tremendously impacted, if it's not already impacted. I mean, like a lot of services are already struggling as is. So I'm saying, do you kind of stay abreast towards the politics sides of where federal dollars are coming from, or you kind of just do your own thing in your own way?
Well, I'm still in the loop with a lot of the research. I follow a lot of groups that are tied to federal funding for homelessness as well. So I'm in the loop, and I know that I don't necessarily work close with those organizations. I will eventually work with those organizations as we go forward. But it's a very, very unfortunate situation that we're in right now, because a lot of those folks, when you start talking about childhood homelessness, now you're talking about people who are already not getting adequate government assistance, but what little assistance they're getting now, could possibly jeopardize as well. So again, it makes me go harder. I was actually speaking to a group of homeless youth in Minnesota, and they were asking me, Dr. Watson, what keeps you motivated to go after this movie? And I told them they're the ones that keep me motivated to go after this. I want them to be visible. I want them to be seen as human beings someday. And I want them to know that their situation they're in is temporary, and that they don't have to necessarily see this as a death sentence when it comes to dealing with homelessness. That, through education, through their faith, through connections, through mentoring, through all the things that are important, they can eventually make it out of it. And one of the things I want to do after the movie comes out is I'm going to probably follow more into an advocacy role for those individuals who are dealing with homelessness. One of the big things I'm pushing is access to education. We started breaking the cycle. We started talking about breaking the cycle. Florida does a great job of any kid who's served an incapacity dealing with homelessness during their high school career. They're eligible, once they graduate from high school, to attend any state college for free.
Hmm.
That's a great way to start breaking the cycle and opening up doors for kids to break the cycle and continue education. Education is going to be the pathway forward to poverty and to kids who are dealing with childhood homelessness, for sure.
Dr. Watson, I was just wondering, do you think people in this country really realize the numbers of homelessness towards people in general, children in particular, now that you're working towards? Because it's like America, you hear two different sides of the spectrum. You hear we have so many multimillionaires, we have more billionaires today than ever. We see people can go on cruises and travel all over the world, but yet in some great places, even like Charlotte, North Carolina, you have a lot of homeless people that are just don't know where they're gonna live at from day to day. So I'm saying, you just think the awareness that maybe people are just not aware of the numbers of homelessness that we have in our country?
That's a great question. I think one of the big challenges, because when we hear homelessness, we automatically think of the veteran or someone else who's on the park bench who doesn't have anywhere to go, which is very, very tough. But there's a whole nother aspect of homelessness that includes the kids and families that are living in shelters, the ones that are in motel rooms, the ones that are doubled up with other families. So those are the ones that kind of fall on the radar screen and kind of are invisible, and we don't necessarily acknowledge them. We don't necessarily see them, and they're in a very, very tough situation because a lot of them don't have home addresses to receive those same government assistance. But they're only one step away from possibly being that person that's on the park bench or in their cars. And some of them have been in those situations. I was pretty fortunate; I didn't have to be in cars or stuff like that, though. But homelessness is definitely, there's a law called the McKinney-Vento law, which kind of expanded homelessness not just to be the person on the streets, but to be anyone in that situation there. So I think as a country, we have to broaden our awareness when it comes to what homelessness looks like in this country. Because again, a lot of these kids and families who are living in these motel rooms, shelters, doubled up with other families, on the surface, they look just like the other kids. They look just like the other families. But when you drill it down and go to their home, that's when you start to see the difference. So we have to shed a light on it, which we're going to do through this movie, and start some conversations around it and encourage, more lawmakers to support the educational aspects of it, and just awareness for us as a society. We have to become more aware of it. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Watson, I mean, that almost sounds like an excellent way to end this particular segment. I always like to try to find a good way or some type of positive way towards the end of the show to really end the particular program. And it sounds like to me what you just stated would be a real good way to subway towards a conclusion. But as I ask every guest every single week, if there's any last words that you would like or any last statements that you would like for people to know about yourself or what you're currently doing, please feel free to express yourself.
Yeah, I'd love for everyone out there to kind of join me in this movement. This is a movement to really bring awareness to childhood homelessness and do our parts to make sure we're helping end it. You can follow me at at tawatson.com, or either email me at tawatson@tawatson.com. Would love to share with you more information about how you can become a part of this movie and movement, to bring awareness to childhood homelessness, and letting our young people know that resiliency is a skill that is learned, letting our society know that resiliency is a skill that's learned. Being resilient doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to always win, but it is going to mean that you'll never lose. Because being resilient is about getting knocked down and getting back up. As long as you're getting back up, you are going to eventually win. So we want to encourage our young people to be resilient. That's why the movie is called Resilient. And we want people in general out there in society, in particular, the ones who are facing some of the things that we're facing in our society right now, to know that a better day is going to come. You remain hopeful. Things are going to get better. If I can go from being homeless to doctor, many of you folks out there can accomplish some amazing things, which we've also have a lot of folks out there accomplishing as well. So appreciate you having me on your show today as well.
And one last question: when is going to be the release date for this upcoming film?
Well, we have a goal to have a release date, hopefully towards the end of 2026, around Thanksgiving time. We're fundraising process now, so anyone who wants to join us in helping us raise the money, we welcome you big time. Then we're going to be starting production here in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is usually about a 25 to 30-day process as well. So we're excited about this, but the first step, we got to get this money raised for sure right now. Yes.
Well, Dr. Watson, it was a pleasure to have you on the All About You talk show this morning. Wish you the very best of luck with this upcoming feature film that you're putting together. And it definitely seems like to me you're a winner. So I have very little doubt that this film will get released at some capacity. And definitely it was an honor to be able to finally meet you, at least through the interview segment. And definitely keep the faith and keep up the good work. What you're doing is definitely needed, and you're making a tremendous impact.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. Okay, this is Jonathan Small. Just enjoyed hosting this edition of the All About You talk show with a very special guest, motivational speaker, author, coach, entrepreneur, Dr. Tommy Watson. And he definitely opened up his life story to you, the viewers, this morning. And I felt he came across definitely with an excellent interview presentation about his life and what he is currently working towards. Look forward, if it's God's will, to be back here next week. We'll be doing a face-to-face public affairs talk show. And until I see you again, for the viewers out there, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.